Ladies and gentlemen across the galaxy, slide on those Imperial tactical scanners because we have a lot to talk about today. It is a topic that is severely undercovered in the Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes video universes out there, and we're going to tackle several topics in regards to this today. We are going to be talking about all the best fleets in Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes, from best to worst. We're going to be talking about the top 10 best plug-and-play ships. We're going to be talking about Malevolence or Negotiator, and we're also going to be talking about important first fleets that you should be chasing after if you are new to Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes. Now, ships is one of the game modes that is not universally loved in Galaxy of Heroes. There is definitely a hardcore audience out there that enjoys it, but overall, seems to be the least enjoyed content in Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes. But my biggest tip is if you're playing the game free to play, honestly, the best way to get crystals nowadays is through Fleet Arena. With the Hyperdrive Bundle Pack, getting people closer to Darth Revan's, Jedi Knight Revan's, and Galactic Legends, and they occupy the top of brand new shards. Really hard for free-to-play players to crack in the top of Squad Arena, but in Fleet Arena, this is going to be the best opportunity for you to get crystals, in my opinion, and it's important for getting Zetas. I first want to talk about the top 10 best overall plug-and-play ships in Galaxy Heroes. Probably the two best plug-and-play, if I have to only narrow it down to two ships, Houndstooth and Millennium Falcon. They provide such a huge boost in viability to no matter what type of squad you use. No matter any of these fleets we're going to talk about today, you can plug in those two ships for any of them. Anakin's ETA has high damage and punishes enemies for taking down your allies. Plo Koon and Gar Saxon, some of the biggest cleansers and healers that we have in the game. Biggs is kind of one of those best all-around tanks that you can use for a long time until you start getting access to the Houndstooth. And Ebon Hawk, probably the biggest buff control ship out there. Buff immunities, mass buff dispels. These ships are going to be great all-around ships in the game. So although we're not ranking all the ships because it doesn't really make sense for this type of game mode, I do want to point out these big ships. All right, let's start talking about the actual fleet rankings in Galaxy of Heroes. And I will say this kind of goes to our conversation why fleets isn't as appreciated as other stuff, because there's not a lot of areas in the game where you want a wide variety of fleets. However, developers have said that they eventually want to add 2 fleets on defense in Grand Arena, so this list might become more important in the future. But right now, primarily, most of the ships that we got to care about are in the Kyber tier, but let's work our way up there. Carbonite. Now, when I was ranking this, it's unlike the characters where there are some really bad teams, like you don't want to have an Eve Koth-led team, for example. Really, the worst fleets in Galaxy of Heroes are primarily just going to be the first fleets you start off with. You're going to have Akbar, Tarkin, or the Endurance, and you're just going to have whatever ships you have at the very beginning. Those are really the bad fleets, but eventually you're going to develop and grow that little beautiful rosebud of a fleet into other more fleshed out ships out there. And that's what leads us to the Bronzium tier. I don't think these Bronzium fleets are considered carbonate because they are usable. And let me explain what we have here. So we still have the Akbar, the Endurance, and the Executrix. But the difference between this and the Carbonite, you just have whatever mishmash ships you put together. In Bronzium, you're starting to actually flesh out those individual factions. With the Akbar's home one, for example, you can build a fairly powerful rebel fleet without the Y-Wing as well as without the Hans Millennium Falcon. Once you get Hans Millennium Falcon, the Akbar most likely will be your first serious top 5 fleet in the game. That's why getting Hans Millennium Falcon is kind of a big thing for pushing inside of Fleet Arena and getting work done. And then we have the Executrix here. Primarily, it's an Empire fleet without the help of the Imperial TIE Bomber. Imperial TIE Bombers, we're going to talk about, really bumps up the viability of an Empire fleet in Galaxy Heroes. And Mace Windu, your first Galactic Republic fleet. But these ships become even better in the following tiers once you start adding key ships that really bring them up to a different viability. And this is where I want to start talking about the top 3 categories. Now, there's no game mode that really takes advantage of the top 3 categories here, but I think it's important, especially that Grand Arena gets 2 defensive fleets. We're going to really want to start looking beyond just the Kyber tier. And here we have the Radis, Tarkin, or Thrawn with Geos, or Akbar with Geos, and you have your kind of your baby Negotiator fleet using the Endurance here. Now, the Radis, one of the more recent ships in Galaxy of Heroes, hasn't really been impressing the community too much. It's got a very low consistency of defeating things like the Negotiator or the Malevolence, but it could beat some of those ships that you will see in the Erodium tier. Overall, especially the Radis, it's missing a ship to really bring it up to at least the viability of the Finalizer, which we will talk about here. But I want to spend most of our time talking about Thrawn, Tarkin, as well as Akbar with the Geonosians. Geonosians, before the introduction of Hans Millennium Falcon, were the meta. It didn't matter if you went with Thrawn, Tarkin, or Geos. If you had Geos in the Houndstooth, that was really the first major fleet arena that we had in Galaxy Heroes, and that is why Han's Millennium Falcon was so powerful, because it had to burst through all the Geonosians that were existing at the time. And this leads us into the conversation, what should be kind of the first major fleet that you should be chasing after? Well, one thing we have to keep in mind, if you followed my beginner free-to-play farming guide we made earlier this year, Separatists for the characters is kind of the first thing to chase after nowadays. But I also kind of slowly talked about the ships that you want to farm, and the main thing to keep in mind is the Zeta challenge. When you're chasing after Zeta challenges, you need dark side ships. So most likely your first fleet that you're going to be developing that's solid before you get Han's Millennium Falcon and the other ships we're going to be talking about is going to be things like Tarkin, as well as the Geonosians. For sure, you're going to want to have the Geonosians, because these ships right here are kind of babysitting before you finally get the Malevolence. But this right here, with the Zeta challenge especially, you need Tarkin and need a bunch of dark side ships. So that's why you're going to be farming basically all the free-to-play dark side ships that are available, and Geonosians need to be high on that list because they help you form a very solid competitive squad in the beginning. They help you get the Zetas, and those ships are going to be used later on. And I want to talk briefly about Mace Windu. Mace Windu gets a little overlooked, but if you have Jedi Knight Anakin Starfighter, Houndstooth, and Ahsoka Tano, you basically have a baby version of the Negotiator that can do some work. I've seen the Endurance do some work up against Malevolences, for example. It's not going to be a top tier fleet, but if you don't have the Negotiator, this is probably going to be a solid fleet to use until you finally get access to Han's Millennium Falcon. And this is what leads us to our Erodium category. Now, Erodium, you're going to see a lot of those lower tier fleets we just talked about jump up because the addition of one or two ships that really take the fleet to the next level. And in my opinion, before you get, let's say, the Negotiator or Malevolence, which is a super endgame fleet to acquire, most likely the #1 fleet after that is going to be Akbar and the Han's Millennium Falcon being the most popular team. Again, kind of like the Geotalk, Akbar and Millennium Falcon was the meta for basically a year straight almost inside a Galaxy of Heroes. It kind of gave you a variety of different fleets you could run. For example, you have the Rebel Y-Wing with Han's Millennium Falcon, or if you don't have the Rebel Y-Wing, it's not needed. You can use Biggs in the starting lineup, but really the main core of the Rebel lineup is going to be Akbar, Han's Millennium Falcon, and Biston's U-Wing, and then that last slot, Biggs Dark Glider, Rebel Y-Wing, and then of course Phantom Ghost, Cassian, Lando's Millennium Falcon. So my biggest tip is, if you're chasing for the best meta fleet outside of Negotiator or Malevolence, it's probably going to be Home 1 and the Rebellion, especially if you have the Rebel Y-Wing. It's going to help you punch through, for example, the Houndstooth, which is incredibly powerful with the Negotiator. But we have other examples of fleets that also do well. We have the Empire, and with the addition of the Imperial TIE Bomber and Darth Vader's rework, bumping up the Darth Vader TIE Advanced stats, as we talked about in a video not too long ago, the Empire fleet is a solid second tier fleet in the game. Definitely a top 5 fleet in Galaxy of Heroes. No matter, there's arrows here. You can use either Tarkin or Thrawn lead. I prefer Tarkin lead with the Empire fleet, but I give you 2 examples of 2 of the best Imperial fleets that exist out there in Galaxies, and these are known to beat Negotiators with a good degree of success, better than the Radas, for example, and also can beat some Malevolences out there. And then at the bottom of the top 5 fleets is going to be the Finalizer. Finalizer definitely is a bit better than the Radas, has a high degree of consistency up against the Home 1 and the Rebellion, and you could beat some Negotiator lineups out there as well, thanks to the help of Hunted and the massive damage and opening moves from the Finalizer. And now we move on to the Kyber territory, where it speaks for itself. Negotiator and Malevolence are the 2 best fleets in the game. We don't need to talk too much about it. You have a variety of different compositions up here. No matter what lineup you really run, as long as you stick to mostly Galactic Republic with the Negotiator or mostly Separatist with the Malevolence, you got 2 of the best fleets in the game. And it comes down to the question, when you finally get to that step where you have Guild Event Token 2 currency and you got to pick Malevolence or Negotiator, which way is the best way to go? And both fleets are very good. They beat all the fleets in the game. Malevolence is the best counter up against Negotiator. Negotiator is the best counter up against the Malevolence. However, if you only can pick one that you could stick with farming for a while, I'm going to tell you guys, farm the Negotiator over the Malevolence first, at least as of now. Who knows, maybe the Malevolence will get a bigger boost in viability, but as the game stands, Light Side Geonosis Territory Battles is much more difficult than Dark Side Geonosis Territory Battles. You don't even need the Malevolence for Dark Side Geonosis Territory Battles. There's plenty of things that require the Negotiator, and Lightside Genos' territory battles. Really, the two fleets you're going to need for Lightside Genos' territory battles is Hans Millennium Falcon with the home one and maybe the Rebel Y-Wing, and then, of course, the Negotiator. So really, for that reason alone, is probably the best way to go about it, because that's the most difficult PvE content in the game. And in my opinion, I think Negotiator has a slightly better edge in terms of all-around viability. But the Malevolence is still a nasty fleet. It could be scary to fight on defense. It steals a lot more banners, in my opinion, than a Negotiator and Alive. They're both solid fleets, don't get me wrong. Go with whatever you love, but in my opinion, most of these lean more over to Lightside Genos' territories and that slightly better all-around viability that the Negotiator brings. So right there, ladies and gentlemen, we talked a lot about ships that has been overdue for our conversation. We talked about the top 10 best plug-and-play ships in Galaxy. We ranked all the fleets. We talked about what's that first dark side fleet you should be kind of gravitating towards Zetas, and what's your first real meta fleet. And then, of course, we talked about what's the best Kyber level fleet. Again, I want to reiterate, if you're a free-to-play player, there's a high degree of probability it's going to be hard to be super competitive in Squad Arena due to the fact that the top end of the meta is filled with lots of hyperdrive bundles or galactic legends, depending on how old you are in Galaxy of Heroes. Fleets, the benefit of fleets, although it's the least appreciated and doesn't get that much support, on the flip side, because Fleet Arena moves so slowly, there's not a lot of new stuff that comes to fleets, and people are a bit more burnt and not enjoying fleets. It's a lot easier to climb up Fleet Arena to get the crystals you need. That might be a lot more difficult than Squad Arena, because Squad Arena moves quickly and has high paywall characters. I want to talk about this because I think it's an important topic to talk about. And in the future, if we get some more ships needed for Grand Arena, for example, or some other game mode in the future that wants to have more ships, it's going to be important to understand the Fleet Arena meta as a whole, so you can dominate your opponents. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully this video was helpful. I know ships isn't the sexiest and prettiest topic to talk about out there, but overall it is still important to talk about. Nonetheless, ladies and gentlemen, like if you did enjoy the video, comment down below. If you want a link to the graphic I used today, there will be a link down below as well in the pinned comments for your viewing pleasure. As always, thank you guys so much for stopping by, and be sure to subscribe so you're not missing a thing. And then Larry, Gary, and I will see y'all in the next video. Someone roll me out that outro.